Hey, what's going on, ASM? So good to be with you here today. So glad that you're tuning in from wherever that might be. And I also just want to welcome in anybody that maybe ASM isn't particularly your student ministry, but you've chosen to check us out online. And so we're so grateful to have you here as well. Just want to welcome you all in today. We're going to be diving into part 3 of our current series, which is Seeing Clearly. And so pretty much we wanted to just take 4 weeks and just talk about how to get our focus and our perspective and our mindset and all that back to the heart of God. That's kind of the heart behind this message series, and we're going to be diving into part 3 today. And so week 1, we talked about Joseph and just the perseverance that he went through in his pursuit of God and pursuit of the dream that God gave him. And he knew that God had a plan for his life, just like God has a plan for our life. And Joseph was determined to live that out. And so then in week 2, we talked about Peter and how he had the faith to step out of the boat and walk on the water with Jesus. And we talked about how it's not always easy to trust God because of all the uncertainty that life brings with it. But we talked about how trusting in Him will put us on a path to seeing Him more and more clearly along the way. And so this week, week 3, you might be saying, Hagen, I've watched the last couple weeks and I totally understand, God has a plan for my life, and I'm all for that, and I get it. And even last week, we talked about just having trust and having faith. And I've been having a real hard time having that. I'm trying, but I'm not really seeing anything happening. I'm not really feeling anything happening. And so I'm just kind of waiting. Nothing's been going on, nothing's been changing, nothing's been happening. So what am I supposed to do? Today, we're going to be talking about the waiting room. So I know usually when you hear that term, the waiting room, you might think of a doctor's office or a hospital or something like that, where you go in and the waiting room, it seems like it takes forever to get to the place where you ultimately intended to go, which is into the doctor's office to get checked out or whatever. But tonight I want to talk about the spiritual waiting room. And so tonight, spiritually, are you in a waiting room with God? Are you in a waiting room waiting on something from God? Have you been waiting on Him to show up and He just hasn't? What are you doing while you're waiting right now? And if you are in a waiting room, how are you going about that time? Are you spending it wisely and making the most out of it? Or are you just kind of throwing it away? Are you going to do the small things now while you're waiting so that when you come out of this, when God, the doctor, finally says, hey, you can come on back, come on. You can come out of the waiting room and come into what I have for you. Are you doing the little things now that when that time comes, you'll be more ready and more equipped to do what He is already planning on assigning you to do? You see, there's more to waiting around than just waiting around. When we're waiting on God to make a move, and we're waiting on God to do what He is wanting to fulfill in our lives, we shouldn't just be waiting on Him to do that. Lamentations 3, verse 25 says, the Lord is good to those who wait for Him, to the soul who seeks Him. So I love this verse because it says, the Lord is good to those who wait for Him. So if you're waiting for God right now, the Lord He's good to you. If you're in that place where you're waiting, He is still good. But it goes deeper. It also says to the soul who seeks Him. You see, it's not about just waiting on God to show up. It's not about just waiting for God to do what He said He was going to do. You've got to be persistent. You've got to continue to pursue. You've got to continue to seek in the waiting. We've got to continue to seek Him even in our waiting. Don't do nothing while you're waiting. Continue to serve, continue to grow, continue to read your word, continue to pray, continue to worship, continue to pursue, continue to seek Him. See, one thing I've realized is that often we want God's power, but aren't willing to accept God's calendar. Often we want God's power, but we aren't willing to accept God's calendar. See, one of our biggest problems with waiting is that nothing in our culture teaches us how to do it. We live in this, what I've heard before, drive-through culture in society. We want everything right now. We don't want to have to wait for it. We want everything to just be done for us now, and we want it to be done quickly, and we want answers right now. Even when you think about buying something off Amazon, you have the choice to overnight something to where you don't have to wait 3 days or 5 days to get it. You can get it the very next day to eliminate your need to wait. And that's the thing about our culture and our society, is that it's done everything possible to eliminate the need for waiting. So therefore, we really don't know how to do it, and we definitely don't know how to do it well, nor do we understand the importance of waiting. See, God often uses waiting as a crucible in which to refine our character. God often uses waiting as a crucible that will refine our character. Well, what do you mean by that? Here's an example. You want to see someone's character, give them hope for something, and see what they do in the in-between. Give them an end goal of something that they're hoping for, and see what they do from now to that end goal. Are they going to continue to work patiently for it and continue to be persistent in it? Or are they just going to pretend like they've already got it because they know they're going to get it? You want to see somebody's character? Do something like that. I remember when I was like a freshman or sophomore in high school, it was like Christmas break. I didn't have a good report card, so I got grounded from my phone. And I'm hanging out with family, and I remember my mom and my aunt had come up with this plan. This is back when that movie Twilight was really popular. A lot of y'all probably don't even know what that movie is. I don't know how old you were when that came out, but this is back when that movie Twilight was popular. It was about the vampire and had Robert Pattinson in it, and that, I don't know what that girl's name is, but it had her in it, and it had that dude, Jacob, who was the werewolf, and it was a pretty cool movie, but this is back whenever it got really popular, and so my mom and aunt came up with this plan. Remember, I'm in 9th or 10th grade, I'm a dude, and the books are really popular, and so they say, you know what, Hagen, if you read all 4 of the books, we're going to give you a test on it, and if you pass the test, you can get your phone back. And so I did not want to be reading no Twilight book, but when I knew that at the end result, if I do well on the test that they were going to give me, I'd get my phone back, guess what I did? I got to read, and I got to read quick. And so I read the first book in like a couple days, read the second book, read the third book, and I think I was like halfway through the 4th book, and I don't remember why Mom did it or what made her want to. Maybe she was having a really good day or something, but she just gave me my phone back anyways. I didn't have to take the test or anything. She just gave it back anyways. But the point I'm trying to make is, I'm right here. I don't have my phone, but it's something that I want. And so now they've given me hope. They say, if you read these 4 books and you pass this test, you can get your phone back. And so from here to here, in this in-between, I read a lot. I read quickly because I was determined. I was driven to do what it took to get what I wanted. See, what I didn't do is, I could have just waited a week or so and been like, hey Mom, I finished the books, taken the test, and I'd have bombed it, of course, because I wouldn't have known what the heck was going on because I didn't read it. But I guarantee you, had I had to take that test, I'd have passed it with flying colors. Because I spent my time waiting, continuing to do the things that it took to get to the place where I wanted to be in the end. And I think it's the same thing with us in our relationship with God. I think God has some of us in a waiting room, and I think that the breakthrough that we're going to get when He finally calls us out of that waiting room is going to exceed every expectation of yours if you continue to pursue, continue to seek, and just see what happens. And so now I want to give a biblical example of that statement, of the fact that God uses waiting as a crucible to refine our character. So as I said earlier, we're going to be talking about Lazarus. And so the story of Lazarus, a lot of you probably know, is that Lazarus died and Jesus raised him from the dead. It's in John chapter 11, verses 1 through 44. It's too long. I'm not going to put it up on the screen. We're going to kind of hit some highlights. We're going to go over it kind of like we did in the Joseph message. So I encourage you to go back, read the story after this message. Get something out of it for yourself. But, pretty much this guy named Lazarus, died, right? And so Mary and Martha, his sisters, their character was tested, especially when Jesus made them wait 2 days before He went and healed them. And so let's get into this story. So I'm going to give you, again, I'm not going to put it all up on the screen because it's so much. Go read it when you can. But I'm going to give you the HPV, the Hagen paraphrase version. So the story goes, Mary sent word to Jesus that Lazarus was sick. So verse 4. She sent word to Jesus. She's like, hey, Lazarus is sick. And then verse 5 and 6, Jesus is like, man, I love Mary and Martha. And I love Lazarus. And then verse 6, he's like, I'm going to stay where I am for 2 more days. It says, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Can you imagine something like that happening in today's world? Like, maybe you're like really, really sick, and you go to the doctor, and he looks at you, and he's like, man, you don't look so good. I'll see you in 2 days. And just walks out. Could you imagine? Jesus is hearing about this dude that he apparently loves. He's a brother of 2 women that he's really close with. And he's like, man, that's tough. We'll go check it out in 2 days. It's just kind of crazy, right? But there's more to it. Let's go back to verse 4. So when Jesus heard this about Lazarus, he said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. So see, Jesus says from the very beginning that this sickness will not end in death, but that it would be used for God's glory. But if you know the story, you know that Lazarus dies. So let's continue. So after the 2 days, Jesus tells his disciples that Lazarus is dead and that he's going to wake him up. So in verse 11, he tells the disciples, he's like, hey, Lazarus is asleep. I'm going to go wake him up. And then they're like, hey, if he's asleep, maybe it'll do him some good to just kind of let him sleep. Don't worry about waking him up. He's good. And then Jesus kind of just straight up, he's like, yeah, no, Lazarus is dead. So we need to go do something about this, right? And so they go and they get there, and Martha finally gets to Jesus, and she says, Jesus, if you had just been here earlier, my brother would not have died. She says, if you had just been here earlier, my brother would not have died. So pretty much I can kind of understand her irritation. Like, why is Jesus waiting 2 days, man? He's got the power to heal Lazarus, but he waits 2 days to even show up. So now let's refer back to what we talked about a second ago. A lot of us, we want God's power, but we aren't willing to accept God's calendar. Kind of hits a little different now, doesn't it? See, we want God's power, but we aren't willing to accept his calendar all the time. We want his power. Like, we know how powerful and strong he is. We know he can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants to. And a lot of times we get frustrated and irritated that he isn't showing up on our time, and we miss out on the bigger picture that is at hand. So let's continue. Verse 21, if you'd been here early, my brother would not be dead. What's crazy is that verse 22, immediately after that, she says, let's go back here. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. If you had just been here earlier, my brother wouldn't have died. I'm ticked off. I'm frustrated. This is your fault. You could have saved us from this. You could have saved him from dying. But I still have faith that God will give you whatever you ask. See, she knew who Jesus was. She knew how close he was with God. And she knew the power that was there. And so she knew that even though her brother was dead, she still had faith that Jesus could make it work. That he could fix it. So just like we talked about in weeks 1 and 2, we've got to continue to have faith. We've got to continue to have trust. Even when we can't see what's going on, even when everything around us is hurting and looking bad, we've got to continue to have faith and hope and trust in the waiting room. So as the story goes on, Jesus eventually brings Lazarus back to life. But a big part of that, I think Jesus was going to do it anyways, but I think a big part of that really just, we talked about character, was that Martha believed in him. It says, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? She replied, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. And then verse 40, right before he brings Lazarus back to life, it says, then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And so now it kind of comes full circle. Remember back in verse 4, that what is going on, this sickness is not going to end in death. But Lazarus died, right? Well, no, because Jesus brought him back to life. And the whole point of the fact of his sickness is not going to end in death. Where he's going to die temporarily, but I'm going to bring him back for the glory of God, just like he foreshadowed in verse 4. That's the big picture. Is that there was something that needed to be done. And I think Jesus knew this, because what happens later on in verse 45 says, therefore many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. See, I think Jesus knew that there were going to be people around in that area that needed to see a move of God, that needed to see something happen for them to actually believe. And so he waited. 2 days, Lazarus died. But he still knew and had access to the power of God that he could bring him back. And he knew that is what it was going to take to get those people saved. A lot of times we miss out on the bigger picture because we're so focused on our own circumstances, our own wants, our own needs. Like, God, I've been waiting on this for years. Why haven't you showed up? Maybe there's something in a couple more years that's going to answer that question for you. And you've got to continue to have trust and faith in the waiting room. See, we don't always know why God waits to show up. We don't always know why. Sometimes he waits 2 days. Sometimes he waits 2 months. Sometimes he waits 2 years. But ultimately, there was a greater purpose in that story of Lazarus. Like he'd already foreshadowed in verse 4. And by him waiting to show up, many believed in God. So how many of you have ever been frustrated with God's timing? But then maybe you've seen that, oh, I understand now. Something happened and you're like, oh, I get why it took so long. We've got to accept God's calendar. We can't rely so heavily on our own. You see, the good news is that when we continue to live patiently, like Joseph, and put our trust in God, like Peter, put our trust in him and in his schedule, not ours, we begin to gain the type of perspective that allows us to be at peace in our soul, like I believe Martha was. Because remember, she said, if you had been here earlier, he wouldn't have died. And she followed that up with, but I still believe that he'll give you whatever you ask. So even in her frustration, even in her anger, even in her uncertainty, even in her lack of understanding of why Jesus decided to wait, she still had peace that God was going to move through Jesus, and they were going to make it work with Lazarus. And so as we kind of come to a close tonight, just like the encouragement that I've been given the last couple of weeks, I want to encourage you again tonight. Don't give up. Whatever dream it is that you've been pursuing, whatever plan it is that God has for your life, don't give up on that. Don't give up on your trust. Don't give up on your hope. Don't give up on your faith. Don't give up. Even though you're in a time of waiting, do not give up. Continue to trust. Keep taking the steps that you know to take. Continue to step. Continue to be persistent. Continue to just go. Don't get frustrated because you aren't yet where you want to be. Act on the belief that God has a plan and he is bringing it to completion in your life. You've got to commit. You've got to continue to do something in the waiting room. You can't do nothing. You've got to continue to read. You've got to continue to pray. You've got to continue to worship. You've got to continue to grow with him. You've got to continue to be ready for whatever it is he's assigning you to do outside of this. So I know it's not the most comfortable place to be or the most ideal situation to be in. But I guarantee you the breakthrough that you will receive when God finally does show up and say, hey, it's your turn. Come on. that will far exceed any expectation of anything you could come up with on your own. Stay faithful, stay trusting, and stay patient. Father, I thank you for tonight. I thank you for the students or whoever it is that's watching this message. God, I just thank you for what you're going to do in their lives. I thank you for how you're already moving, God. And I just pray that this story just strikes a chord in them. And so they say, you know what, I've been waiting for forever for this thing to happen. And I've been waiting for forever for this thing to happen. But now I understand that I'm just in a place where I need to wait. And so I choose to wait patiently. And not only do I choose to wait patiently, but I choose to continue to pursue you as I wait. So I thank you, Father, for those that have heard this message, and I pray that you just do something in their life. I pray that you just move in their life right now. And I pray that whatever you've done in their life, God, that they are not the same as when they first started hearing this message. It's not about the message, but it's about what you want to do through them. So I just thank you for this day. I thank you for who's watching it. And I just pray peace and joy and blessing into their life right now. In your mighty and powerful name I pray. And thank you for teaching us how to wait. In your name I pray. Amen. 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 Hey, Agape students, it's so good being with you. Love this. I know it's difficult that we can't connect physically, but again, I'm just so grateful for the ability to have technology to be able to have this. Hope you guys are watching. Hope you guys are enjoying. We are in part 4. Next week, we're going to finish up this series, and it's going to come full circle, so I'm excited for that. So, hey, be back for part 4 next week. Looking forward to doing it again. See y'all next time.